Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Wealth Conversation podcast with me, Tsitsi. I guide high-achieving women on their journey to build lasting wealth so they can prepare for an abundant future in every area of their life. I hope that today's episode will help you to transform your relationship with money so you can make the choices that will enable you to create the opportunities and lasting wealth that you desire. Let's get straight into this week's episode. In this guest episode, I'll be focusing on our mental well-being and how past and present trauma can impact our behaviors. My guest, Jabrita Shelton, is a wife, mother, published author, speaker, and transformational coach with 10 years as a trauma-informed care professional. Her journey began with brokenness leading as the star feature. From childhood trauma to the mental break that drove her to a psych ward from no longer being able to carry the weight as a strong Black woman. After 14 years of her doing intentional root work around healing and becoming to understand her own personal journey, she has now been able to transform what once was a daunting story into one so triumphant you'd have to see it to believe it. Jabrita Shelton is the CEO of Jabrita Shelton & Co., the chief consultant of the M.A.D.N.E.S Method and Mind Your Madness experience. Jabrita says that we have to accept the breakdown so we can get to the breakthrough. I hope you're ready to meet this phenomenal woman. Welcome, Jabrita, to the Wealth Conversation podcast.
Thank you so much, Tsitsi, for having me. I'm so excited about being here, your guest, and just all of the amazing things that you're doing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jabrita. I can't wait to share this with my listeners. So let's just jump straight into it. And could you please tell us about you? Who is Jabrita Shelton?
Where do I begin? So Jabrita Shelton is a wife. I am a mother. I am a curator, an author, a speaker, and a transformational coach. I feel as if I'm more than that. So, we go about titles quite often. We wear a lot of hats as women. But I personally, myself, I am a devoted woman to the will and the working of God. A servant leader. I am a servant at heart. I love life. I love people. And I am a woman who have learned through my experiences, through observation, through observing myself, through self-regulation. And I am also a survival of various counts of traumatic experiences. So I'm an overcomer. I'm victorious. I'm just so many things. So it's things that I can just say about myself because I've walked the path. So nothing that I have learned, in passing, but I've actually walked the steps that I speak of. So that is who I am.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Jabrita. And hopefully throughout this discussion, you'll share some of those ups and downs and your triumphs, how you've
Absolutely.
overcome them. Now, I know you pretty well, and I know that you have a method that you use to support women on their journey to overcoming trauma. I just want to know how and why did you come up with this method?
So let me just tell a little bit of my backstory. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, which most people, only think of as Chicago. We're next door neighbors to Chicago, Illinois. But I grew up and I was very rich in love. However, we had some very adverse circumstances. I grew up in a house of domestic violence where my father was, an alcoholic. At one point of his life, he was also addicted to drugs. My parents' separation early on caused me to go into silence for about 2 years. And then I went through, some psychology as a young child because my mother didn't understand why I stopped talking. But I actually thought it was the devastation was that I thought it was my fault because children does not understand that what happens between parents is not their fault. And so I grew up on welfare. My mother always kept a beautiful home, but from an early age, seeing domestic violence, being the child that woke her mom up from fading spells, being the child that, jumped in between the fights, hearing my father being very belligerent with my mom, seeing these things, I didn't understand the impact or the effect of it over time. Also know that my father did not make above $15,000 in his entire life with working jobs. So, we had a lot of financial struggles. We had a lot of, domestic issues and problems and different things like that. Also, of course, being, a survival of rape and molestation. So again, those are some of the traumatic experiences that I've gone through, as a child. And as it relates to that, growing up at an adolescent and a teenager, I kept myself pretty busy. I was in the arts, so I was always singing. I was always dancing. Music was my escape. It was the way that I could actually get through the things that I needed to get through, and always have this optimistic view on life to say that though I am going through these things, this is not who I am. There's got to be greater. There's have to be more. So the one thing that my mom asked me to do was make sure that you graduate high school and don't have any babies. And so I kept my promise to her with that. And from there, my pursuit was I'm going to go to school and I'm going to be a child psychologist because I wanted to really help children in underserved communities really understand the impact of trauma, really understand that they had a way out and that their circumstances did not have to dictate the outcome of their life. And so I can't tell you where I got that information from. It was just something innate within me that really allowed me to know that though my situation and my circumstances were very bleak and very dim, I had a bright side, a bright way of looking at things on the other side. So, going through those traumatic experiences, seeing my father abuse my mom, and then, of course, I got into abusive relationships. So I had a situation where, I was physically abused, which led to restraining orders, which led to my self-esteem being broken, my confidence being broken, me feeling as if I was just, here, like I didn't have a choice. I didn't have an option. Everything always happens bad to me. Like that was the thought that I had, even though I had a perspective that it could get better. So fast forward, I was about 27 years old when I actually began to go to therapy. And at 27 years old, I had already had an attempt and a half, an attempt and a half with suicide. I had already had encounters where I was trying to I had tried to take my life, and I was depressed. I was completely just at a low in my life. And at the time, I had met my husband. We weren't, of course, husband and wife at that time, but we were just courting, or what they say, courting or dating. And he was the person that taught me that you have a choice. Just because you have circumstances and situations such as these does not mean that you do not have the ability to choose. And so in that choosing, I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do to choose myself now? What do I need to do to create the life that I believe I was born to live? And so many years of counseling, therapy, different modalities, energy healing, talking, of course, to a psychologist, talking to therapists, talking to counselors, being the student in my own experience brought me to understanding trauma, understanding the impact of trauma, understanding the impact of childhood trauma, unresolved trauma, triggers and trauma responses, and all the things that brought me and led me into Mind Your Madness. And I know that I said a whole lot, but I wanted to really paint the picture to help people understand that when we deal with trauma and we do not really take an introspective look as to where it began and take time to trace it back, sometimes we miss things in the interim. So I don't want you to miss it, because everything that you're dealing with now, presently, is a result of some form of unresolved trauma. So I'll just stop there before we go into a little bit more. But that's what brought me to Mind Your Madness. I did not understand that I had, done the work over 14 years. I didn't understand the impact of what I had actually done. And then when I created the method, the Madness Method, and I look back and I begin to see God, and I said, wow, this is amazing. This is truly amazing. And so in that time, in that secret place, in that time where I really began to consult him, it was like, but this is what you've done. You've walked yourself through the steps of minding your madness and what that madness looks like. So that's what it's been.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jabrita. I'm so glad you chose you because we wouldn't be here today. And I know your method is going to support a lot of women out there. Before we break down the method, could you share how your past trauma has impacted your wealth? And I ask this question because I know from dealing with my own money issues that a lot of it was based on things that happened to me in the past. I'd love for you to just share what any experiences that you wish to share with us on how your past traumas impacted your relationship with money.
Oh, that's a really, really good one. And I'll just say, I know that I kind of led to, my father never making above $15,000 a year. And, my mother did the very best that she could. I know that there was never a time when we said, Mom, we have pictures. We need you to, we need money for pictures or we need money for this. She always made a way. I did not have a real understanding of money. I did not have a real understanding of wealth. But what I did have an understanding of is that there's a difference between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich is something that you can absolutely be without the transfer of wealth, because rich is something that's within. Wealth is the manifestation of what you have within. That's what I learned. My experience with money was very like what is it they call it? It's like a love-hate relationship. It was like a love-hate relationship because I didn't understand money. We didn't have money conversations when I was growing up. We didn't talk about bills. We didn't talk about, budgeting accounts. Like, I don't even think that I had my first bank account until I was like 20, maybe 20 years old. Didn't understand credit. Credit wasn't a conversation in our household either, right? And so, of course, my very first credit card, I ran up the bill. And then now I'm in collections because I had no knowledge of what credit was, how credit is used, how it needs to be established, any of those things. And also the same thing with my bank accounts. I didn't understand overdrafts. I didn't understand that in order for you to gain interest, you had to accumulate a certain amount, per month. All I knew about money is that you go to work, you get a check, you come home, you pay the bills or not, and and then you work again so that you can get the next check. So I was very ignorant to money, to how it worked, to finances, and to wealth in general. My husband was the person that actually took me to the side and began to assess my spending habits. But again, it was a situation where that was a trauma response for me because it was almost like he was trying to correct something that he didn't understand where it came from. So in order for you to be able to establish this new rhythm or this new pattern of a behavior, you never come in the gate judging something that you don't understand, right? And so he began to judge me according to what he saw and his perspective of how I used money. But what he did not understand is that that was the first time in my life that I had privy to my own income, because I had been working since I was 13 years old, but my money was going to help pay bills for the deficit of what my father was not able to do. And so at, 19, 20, 23 years old, when I began to have my own money and my own say about money, it was like, if I work, I'm going to get what I want. And, that was my attitude. But then when he came into my life, he began to show me like, this is how you use money. This is how you budget. This is how you balance. You need to save. Like, my husband was the person who could really deal with delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm.
My trauma would not allow me to have delayed gratification simply because I had no control over certain aspects of my money and over my life. So when I was in a seat to have control over my life, I said to myself, I was not going to allow anyone to dictate what I do, how I do it, when I do it. Again, another trauma trigger, another trauma response. So my relationship over time with wealth, or with building wealth, has changed significantly when I began to do the work to heal around those areas of, generational ignorance, begin to have money conversations, begin to be around people who have money, but also who are good stewards over the money that they have. And it was a lot of trial and error. And that's why I say love-hate relationship. A lot of trial and error, because there were times where my husband had an expectation of me, stewarding the finances, and the my immediate need of what I wanted got in the way of that. So that also caused issues in the marriage, where I had to become a little bit more responsible and a little bit more accountable. And the accountability piece was not something that I had, because it wasn't something that I knew. So trauma will really impact not just your ability to make money, but your ability to keep money, to save money, to know where money needs to go and how it needs to be used. I was very, very intentional with the conversations with my children about money, because I didn't have those conversations growing up. And so I wanted to, have my children understand, have a bank account early, understand that you're going to save more than you spend, understand that, yes, I do know that you want these things, but let's find a way to work for these things and not take money from what we have to get the things that we want. And so it's still changing. I am still coming into full knowledge and understanding of, wealth, and how I want to set it up for my family, but understanding the responsibility that it takes to build wealth and for it to be sustained over time. That relationship and that understanding has come with, of course, healing those areas over my life, healing that trauma over my life, beginning to speak to myself differently about money, and know that I am a product of my past, but I am not my past. And so what I have gone through is only an indication of what I can continue to choose, or the choice that I can choose to make better. And so that has been my relationship with money.
Wow, Jabrita, I'm lost for words, but I say these things to people quite a lot, about when they come to me with seeking support to manage their money. And it seems like, they get confused when I'm saying, we need to go back to the beginning, right? And it's not about the money, it's about you. And it's about, things you've experienced. And let's talk about that. Like you, I know that to be true because I've been through that journey. I had to go through a journey to understand why I was so comfortable with making money, but not keeping it. And for so many reasons, the main one was I lost my parents at a very young age. So it was just like nothing good. I don't deserve anything good. Or if I do have anything good, it will be taken away from me. And for a long time, I'm navigating this world and not understanding that that's playing in the back of my mind. And so, I always talk about, the wealth cornerstones, and one of them is your mental well-being. It's linked to everything else, but you really
Absolutely.
need to focus and understand it, because a lot of our actions come from things that we don't even remember, or stuff we feel we've dealt with, right? But we haven't really dealt with. And I love the fact that you talk about how your husband tried to help you, because I think, when we're getting into relationships again, if we don't understand ourselves and the basis of our actions, when we're now in a relationship with someone else, when they are trying to help, or when you're trying to help them, you kind of hit a brick wall, and it brings frustration and conflict into the relationship. And it's because as individuals, we haven't really looked into our madness and actually thought, what's really going on? What is the basis of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, on that point, I'd love for you to take us through the steps of the M.A.D.N.E.S method.
Okay. And, right before I actually get in that, as you were speaking, what came up for me was just understanding that, you said a lot in terms of the mental well-being, right? If our mental is not well, we don't have the capacity or the ability to really move through life in an exponential way. We don't have the ability to really understand wellness in the full context in which wellness should be experienced. And so it's so important to really, begin to do the work around, like you said, making that connection. Where did it begin? Where did it start? Why do I feel, either very fulfilled financially or very more like scarcity? A lot of what I did was out of the survivalistic mindset. Okay. A lot of what I did was out of that survivalistic, the fear of missing out, the scarcity. Let me overspend here just in case we don't have it again next month. Like all of those habits are birthed out of trauma. They're birthed out of trauma. They're trauma responses. And what we fail to realize is that when we don't do the necessary work, it really causes a detriment over time financially. Like if I want to leave financial wealth to my children and my children don't understand, they just know that, oh, we have it, but they don't understand how to use it. They don't understand the responsibility of managing and sustaining it. Like that creates problems over time. There becomes a breakdown. And so in order for us to get to the breakthrough, we have to get honest enough with ourselves to accept the breakdown so that we can break through. Getting into the M.A.D.N.E.S.S method, and it can be applied in any, area of trauma. It can be applied in any aspect or any area. Like, for instance, you can become to just understand where your trauma began, like where your trauma story started, or you can be dead in the middle of trauma and not understanding that because I did not deal with these things, this is why these particular patterns, these circumstances continue to show up. These cycles continue to persist in my life because I haven't done the work that I needed to do to break down and then break through, right? And so let's just talk about the M.A.D.N.E.S.S method. The M.A.D.N.E.S.S method is, first it's mind your madness. The M.A.D.N.E.S.S method is mind your mental, mind your attitude, mind your disciplines, mind your nuances, mind your energy, mind your soul, and mind your spirit. And so if you really focus on those 7 steps, and so what I particularly do is I teach women how to navigate past and present trauma organically through mindfulness, right? That's exactly what the M.A.D.N.E.S.S method is. It's just teaching you how to identify your trauma, how to acknowledge that it happened, how to own how you feel in that process, how to now shift yourself from the experience and then begin to forgive so that you can get to your healing. Because in all honesty, and some of the things that I've been teaching in my community and some of the clients that I've been working with is really, a lot of times as people who have endured trauma, we focus more on what other people have done to us, but not necessarily what we are doing to ourselves.
Oh, wow. That's powerful, Jabrita.
So rather than us punishing ourselves, let's pursue ourselves. Let's pursue why we are doing the things that we're doing so that we can begin to heal and recover so that we don't have to continue to punish ourselves over and over again around something that we really did not know. We didn't have the tools. We didn't have the understanding. We were not equipped to do the things that we are now judging ourselves and punishing ourselves for 15, 20, 10 years later, right? And so we have got to get to a place in dealing with trauma where the eye is not on the other person, but the eye is now on us. What further damage have we done with what has been done to us? What more can we do to empower ourselves so that we don't have to continue to walk in the detriment of our past, but we can use the experience as fuel to ignite our future? Like that's where we have to get to with the conversation. And I understand that, the M.A.D.N.E.S.S method is really here to help people understand, mentally, mind your mental. Where are you? Let's locate where you are right now. How is your mental wellness showing up in your personal experience and then in your external experience? When you talk about your attitude, what are the things that you're feeling? What are the things that you're thinking about. I tell people all the time, think about what you're thinking about. How am I feeling in this experience? And then we talk about your disciplines. What are you doing every single day to create a new? What are you doing? What new patterns are you setting? What new behaviors are you creating? But in the disciplines, it's not just about the doing, it's also about the undoing. What things do I have to let go that's no longer serving me so that I can create new patterns to reestablish myself as something more, as a whole person and not a part person? Am I nuances? Am I aware of my triggers? Am I aware of my trauma responses? And if I am, how am I handling them? Am I continuing to do the things that I saw mom do? Am I continuing to do the things that I saw grandma do? What is it that I'm doing to mind my triggers, my nuances, my responses? And then in your energy, how are you showing up? What is your energetic experience, your energetic profile? How are you showing up in the experience with yourself and with others? How is the trauma showing up in your body energetically? Are you noticing that, you are, an emotional eater? That when you get happy or when you're sad, you find food to comfort you? Energetically, what's happening? Is your shoulders always hurting? Is your back always in pain? Like, that happens energetically, but trauma is stored in the body. And then your soul. The soul is the seat of your emotions. It's where everything begins and where everything persists. In your soul, what's happening? And then your spirit. How are you going to evolve from your experience? How are you going to evolve? How are you going to shift the pain of what happened to you? And how are you going to serve that pain well? And so that's what the M.A.D.N.E.S.S method is really all about. It's understanding where you are in your trauma. Just recently, in the forum, we talked about, now one of the things that I want to begin to add as a service is a trauma autopsy. When you think about when people expire, most times there is an extended service if we don't know the cause of death. And so the autopsy comes when either the family or prosecutors in some regards are seeking out what was the cause of death. What was the moment or the time that this person expired? What did they expire from? And so I bring it over into terms of our trauma. Most people know their story, but they don't know at what point in their story that they become dead to themselves, because the experience of trauma really impacted them, affected them, caused them to die to some form of who they knew themselves to be. Trauma has the ability to paralyze us, to stagnate us, to cause us to change course, a change of course of direction. And so with the trauma autopsy, it's giving people the opportunity to write their story so that we can begin to dissect it, trace it back to what happened, how early on, the causes and the effect, and really see how it has created a pattern over time. I can't give it all away, but that's just the start of, the trauma autopsy, because it's something that we need to look more into, again, because it allows us to look at how we were affected, not so much how the other person affected us, and gain control so that we can now live a life of mental wellness, live a life of spiritual wholeness, live fulfilled, and not from a place of brokenness or a place of the past. But what are we going to do to evolve from the experience so that we may live more holistic, more whole, and more in alignment with who we truly are before the trauma happened.
Oh, I love that. And as you were talking, Jabrita, I was just thinking about my experience with various trauma. And the one I do talk about a lot is losing my parents. And I remember actually saying to someone really close to me, not a person in my family, but someone really close to me that, I am going to change. I am not going to be the same person. I remember that so clearly. And as you're talking about that autopsy, I'm like, that was potentially one of the moments where things shifted and I decided to become somebody else, and the old me to be like, we need to put you on pause or maybe even bury you because things have changed. What I knew had changed. Wow, that has just been a massive light bulb moment. Because then, from my experience, just living through being the new me who had to be the very responsible, the whatever, I got to a point where no one really needed me anymore. And it was like, okay, I now need to find me again. Like your husband said, choose you. I needed to find me again. And this is the journey that I'm actually on, where I'm also finding myself doing things, being around certain people and thinking, oh, this is really interesting, but actually enjoying it. And it's like, oh, this is me, right? I had lost me at the age of 17. I'm 43 now, and I'm only really starting to find me.
That's so good. That's so good. And I felt that because we don't give ourselves permission. Trauma does not allow us to have those experiences. When we become dead to, for instance, and I'll give you an example, a young woman who experienced sexual trauma at an early age, parts of her was ripped apart. As a result of that, she lost control. And so the pattern begins that every man now that wants a piece of her body at will, she gives it to. Because the devastation of being taken from is too much to handle. We don't go deep into understanding why we show up in these experiences until we have to. And so in your case, when you laid her down at 17 years old, and now at 43 years old, picking her back up and understanding, I enjoy this. I can allow myself to have this experience. That's a connection to who you knew yourself to be, some of the things that you experienced that you really took joy in. That trauma did not allow you to have that experience. That trauma caused you to feel as if you had to now become something that you were forced into being because of this particular experience. And that's what trauma does. Yet we go through life. We never try to re-explain to ourselves. We never try to paint a new picture or a new understanding. Like, we are so sold on what happened, the way it happened, that nothing else can present as and then we don't have the ability to see the blessing even in the most traumatic experiences.
That is so true. I'm just thinking now about, the woman who's listening and saying, uncovering her unresolved traumas is just too painful for her. What one thing would you say to her to just get her to start just taking that one step to finding herself again?
I would honestly say bet on you. Bet on you. Because if you think about all of the time that you have taken over time to reflect a person that is so far from the truth of who you truly are, bet on yourself. If you think about what trauma has taken from you and how you desperately want to get to the fulfilling of who you haven't even discovered as yourself, bet on you. The only way you can get to the breakthrough is to go through the breakdown. That breakdown comes with sitting in the rawness of your emotions, the rawness of how it feels, understanding, that the person that victimized you very well may be still a person that you're in close contact with. It's being able to confront yourself. It's being able to tell your truth, even if you have to do it in written form, even if you have to write the letter, burn the letter, release the letter, bury the letter, whatever it is that you need to do, bet on you. You need to get it out, sit and experience those raw emotions. And then after you finish crying and after you finish feeling, ask yourself, now, where do I want to go from here? And in doing so, it's going to take courage. But more importantly, it's going to take faith. Because the person that you have began to know is only the person that you've practiced, not who you are.
I love that. Go through the breakdown and bet on you.
Yeah.
Jabrita, we could talk for ages on this topic. There is just so much. But I have to let you go. And I'm so unwilling to do so, but I have to mind my madness and help you mind your madness at this period. So I will just ask you the question that I ask everyone relating to the Wealth Cornerstones. And you've already alluded to a lot of this, how the mental is so linked to every area of our well-being. I've sort of narrowed it down to 5 key areas, which I call the Wealth Cornerstones. And I'd love to know what your definition of wealth is in each of these areas. So that's your physical, your mental, your social, your spiritual, and your financial well-being.
Wow. Okay. So you might have to walk me through each of them. Okay. So my physical well-being for me, though I am still working it out, of course, it's exercising. It's understanding, your body, understanding, being in tune with yourself, being so introspective with yourself that you don't have to seek the opinions of other people. Intuitively what's happening within. It's also about, of course, taking care of your vessel, whether it's, eating. I know that, going to the gym is not everybody's jam, and that's cool, but finding ways to really steward your temple, whether it's massages, whether it's exercising, whether it's a dance class. Like, I love all of those things. So that's my experience. Yeah.
Okay. The next one is mental well-being.
I would honestly say, pay attention to what you're thinking. Pay attention to your most dominant thoughts. Are they positive or are they negative? Also, pay attention to how you self-talk, what you're telling yourself, and what you're feeling about yourself. And I'm gonna insert this real quick, because most people only look at themselves in the mirror when they are on their way out of the house. But I would challenge you to take a moment and really, really, really look at yourself and think about what you're thinking about yourself. That's always a gauge to know where you are mentally. Because if I'm doing a negative self-talk within, it's going to show out. It's going to show up on the outside as well.
I hear that. The next one is spiritual well-being.
Spiritual well-being, for me, is something that I absolutely, I'm a huge advocate of spiritual. I'm a huge advocate of all of it, but your spiritual well-being also plays into your mental as well. Having faith, believing in, for me, God, for whatever it is, anything bigger than you, right? But spiritual well-being is not just about religion. It's truly about understanding the relationship between you and spirit. And so in that experience, for me, spiritual well-being, how I know that I'm spiritually well is how I'm treating people, how I'm treating myself. And it's kind of like a gauge, you know, reading, you know, whether it's the Bible, whether it's a devotional, listening to a word, listening to a positive podcast, like those things are things that we do to build ourselves spiritually, but also prayer and meditation is so solace in my spiritual well-being for me because it keeps me connected, it keeps me centered, and it keeps me well. I don't even like to say balanced, but it keeps me well blended. I'll just say that.
Yeah, well blended. And the last two are social and financial well-being.
Social well-being is so important, especially for people who are, you know, extroverted and even introverts as well. Like I'm an ambivert, so I'm good with being with people, but I really like my alone time as well. But the social piece is so critically key. Again, engaging those relationships, right? Having good positive communication, being around people who can challenge your thoughts, who can cause you to really think about, you know, I always go back to think about what you're thinking about. But when you're in healthy social circles, those people you can really lean into to learn from, to glean from, to engage, and also to draw a different perspective around things that either you knew or you didn't know. So that's so very important. And the last one you said was
Financial.
financial. Ooh, financial wealth. I'm still growing in this area. I'm still growing here. I'm growing in all areas, but financial wealth is not just for you. It is truly for you to be able to um, create the legacy, the impact, the influence. Like I always tell my husband, I say, I want our children's floor to be our ceiling. And so, how do we do that? We do that by understanding money, by understanding how it works, by building healthy habits around spending, around saving, investing, and then giving it some of that away. So, you know, it's finding ways to make better, to create more with what you have and not just with what you've been given.
Yeah, I love that. Your children's floor being your ceiling. That's a great way of thinking about generational wealth, which is something
Yeah.
I go on and on about. Jabrita, thank you so much for your time. How can listeners get in touch with you if they want to find out about the M.A.D.N.E.S method or how they can work with you?
So right now I am really focusing on speaking to groups, speaking to churches. I'm just open to come in to speak, to do a workshop around, you know, the M.A.D.N.E.S method. And so you can find me. I do have a community, Mind Your Madness Experience, on Facebook, which is a private Facebook community. You can also find me on Instagram. I also have a book that I authored back and it was released in March, and it's called the Mind Your Madness Experience. You can go on my website at www.mindyourmadnessexperience.com, purchase your guide, and then you can be enrolled into the Madness Forum, where we actually go over each step of the method month by month. And there's so many more things that are on the horizon. So I would just encourage you to kind of check me out on either of those platforms. You can email me again, mindyourmadnessexperience@gmail.com. That's all the things. I do have some downloads that are coming, some audio downloads and some audio affirmations that you will be able to find on any streaming platform, actually coming out in September. So I'm looking forward to meeting you guys, or just DM me if you have questions. If you want to book a consult, more than free to talk with you and speak with you over there. So
Fantastic. And I'll be putting all the links that you've given me in the show notes so people can find it easy to get hold of you. Thank you so much, Jabrita, for your time today. And I just want to thank you for all the people's lives you are going to touch and those you've touched already. And I know that whoever's listening to this episode of the podcast, you have really opened the gate for them to actually dealing with some of the issues that have been holding them back in their lives. So I really want to thank you for being obedient to your calling and just moving forward, but most importantly, choosing you.
Thank you so much. And I do appreciate this time yet again. And it's been a complete pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Connect with me at The Wealth Conversation on Facebook and Instagram so we can continue the discussion. Also, if you're ready to define what wealth truly means to you, then go to thewealthconversation.com and download the Wealth Cornerstones guide. Until next week, stay focused on becoming the designer of your financial future.